All right, so today's discussion will give you important insights on protecting your business. While we do have an amazing panel of attorneys today to guide us through our discussion, please remember this information does not constitute legal advice. Axion Opportunity Fund is proud to support entrepreneurs through access to capital and educational opportunities like this webinar. And we are very grateful for our partners at Fifth Third Bank for sharing our commitment to small businesses. Before we dive into our discussion, I'm pleased to introduce Robert Brinkley from Fifth Third Bank, who will share a bit about the bank's commitment to the community. Thanks for being here, Robert.
Thank you, Brittany. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Brinkley, and I am CRA Line of Business Development Manager at Fifth Third Bank. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Protecting Your Small Business Legal Strategies for Success. This is our third webinar of 2023 in partnership with the Axion Opportunity Fund. Axion Opportunity Fund and Fifth Third Bank share a common goal, and that's the pursuit of helping entrepreneurs overcome barriers to achieving business growth and scale. Whether you're doing that as a startup or a longtime entrepreneurial veteran, our team at Fifth Third and our resources are available to you every step of the way. Please visit our resource center at 53.com and let us help you meet your financial goals and assist you with smart financial solutions for both your personal and business needs. Thank you again so much for your time today, everyone. Back to you, Brittany.
Thank you, Robert. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our conversation first by introducing our wonderful expert panelists today. First, I'm excited to introduce Kristen Hurwitz. Kristen is a business attorney committed to helping BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and women entrepreneurs protect their work and themselves as their business and impact grow. She built her law practice on paying it forward 8 years ago, reinvesting at least 10% of profits in organizations supporting women and social justice. And now she offers a DIY contract template shop in addition to her flat rate, transparent pricing for strategic legal advisor services. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for the introduction.
Of course, so great to have you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. And next, we have Pamela Rosario. Pamela is a Dominican attorney raised in NYC with over a decade of legal experience. She currently specializes in intellectual property and business law, helping small businesses and entrepreneurs get the legal assistance they need to run successful and legally protected endeavors with "knowledge is your ultimate superpower" as her mantra. She believes it is your duty to protect yourself and your business by arming yourself with all of the information you'll need to intimately understand each aspect of your business. Hi, Pamela.
Hi, Brittany. Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump right in. So, Kristen, I'd love to start with you. What factors should business owners consider when choosing the right legal structure for their business?
Thanks, Brittany. This is a great question that I often discuss with clients as well as through Axion Opportunity Fund's coaching program. It's like, how do we get started? Where do we get started and why? And I like to kind of take a three-prong approach to this particular question. One is like looking at your actual cash flow, like where are you at in business? And do you actually have the funds either from your own savings or from other sources to be able to actually form the business entity in a way that makes sense for right now, as well as your kind of longer term goals? And can you sustain that, especially for early stage businesses where there may not be cash flow yet? As a California licensed lawyer, I let folks know like the franchise tax board will charge you $800 even if you make zero. So that's a really important practical piece to consider. The other factor I'd look at is kind of what are the risk factors? And a lot of that can come back to at least at the outset, like bodily harm. So, if you are a product-based business, if you make lotions or, something where people are putting it on or in their body, that is one of those things where we can't control what kind of reaction they might have, even if you've done a lot of testing on it beforehand. So to me, that's a higher risk point than someone offering, some standalone like one-on-one coaching sessions. The other piece would be, if you're doing like physical therapy or fitness, so something movement or body related in that kind of way. And then also if you've got a physical space, so, slip and fall, like one of those is something that can completely shut down a business overnight. So those are kind of risk factors that I'll usually look at. And then the last piece is the tax strategy. And I always say, please talk to a CPA who takes a full picture of your financial situation, because the lawyers, we can advise on risk factors and some of the strategic pieces around taxes, but unless it's a certified tax specialist, which many small business lawyers are not, you definitely want to talk to your CPA as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that note as well, Kristen. It's always really important to kind of talk to the expert in their field just to get a full overview of what would be best. Thank you. And Pamela, I would love to kick this same question to you. What factors should business owners consider when choosing the right legal structure for their business?
Yeah, a lot of the same things that Kristen mentioned, looking at the requirements for maintaining that entity in your particular state or the state that you choose to form. Some states have really high annual or biannual fees, like Kristen mentioned in California. There's a somewhat myth out there in the interwebs that choosing Delaware to file for your business is, a good idea for all businesses. But Delaware has a really high annual tax fee that entities have to pay regardless of revenue. In New York, where I'm licensed, your annual or biannual fee is based on the revenue of your business. So, some states have so many different requirements. So definitely recommend when I work with clients for us to work in tandem with an accountant, a CPA, some type of tax professional is really of the utmost importance here. Really assessing what makes sense for you and for your business from a financial perspective, from a legal perspective, but also just from an operational admin perspective. Like, does it make sense for your business to have these fees, to form this type of entity, whether it's a limited liability company or corporation? And then also, again, understanding your plan for your business growth, looking at your financials. Does it make sense to form one entity over the other? For example, for startups, tech startups, we don't really recommend forming LLCs, for example. It makes more sense to form a corporation. Do you have multiple partners, or are you a single member company? So again, lots of conversations to have with your attorney in tandem with your tax professional, just so that you understand all of the requirements for maintaining these entities in the state that you choose to do so.
Yes, thank you so much for that. It's really good to know, since everything is so different by state, just to know what you should be looking for based on where you live. All right, next question. So, Kristen, I'd love to start with you. Contracts are vital for risk management. Could you highlight a few key contractual elements that small business owners should prioritize to protect their business?
This is always a great question. A lot of my work centers around contract writing and negotiations, as well as helping folks through disputes that come up. So I think to start, the reason we're signing a contract is, yes, to set like expectations around what that relationship's going to look like. But it's also, you don't end up looking back at the contract unless something's going wrong, right? So I always like to start with, like, what's the breakup plan? Everybody comes in, we're like really excited about this partnership. How do you want to make sure that you're starting in right relationship so that you can also end in right relationship as much as that is possible? Like, do you need to give advance notice? Can anyone get out at any time? Or, is it just in case of, a breach that, someone breaks a promise and doesn't fix it within a certain period of time? So these are things that you should have anticipated in the contract, because again, if everything's going well, people don't end up actually going back and looking at them all that often. The other kind of key practical piece is, there's an exchange of some sort of what law calls consideration. So that may be actual cash, that may be something else of value. but what are those payment terms and how are you going to enforce that, whether you're the one who's going to be making payments, but let's say the other party doesn't do what they said they were going to do. Or if you're the one who's supposed to be receiving the payments, like how can you use like business strategy to set yourself up for success so you're not spending so much of your time kind of rushing after people trying to get paid after you've already provided all the things of value to them. I see this a lot in consulting contracts or independent contractor agreements with big companies where folks are getting paid after they've already kind of given away the baby. So we want to make sure that we're kind of doing what we can to protect ourselves on the front end, so that you can actually keep your energy focused in fulfillment of that contract relationship rather than, the administrative billing piece of it. And then finally, I'd say a big one, and I'm sure Pamela will have more to say about this as an intellectual property attorney too, but who owns what? So what is being created? What is going to be used or provided that may have been created prior to this engagement? And then how can that be used during or after the contract ends? So this all kind of comes down to a more complicated way of kind of parsing out the intellectual property with very specific language. But on the most basic level, we want to know like what's being used, who owns it, how can they use or modify it, what happens when the contract ends.
Thank you for that. I love the way you mentioned it's kind of the breakup plan because you're right. You're not really looking at that if everything's going well. So just considering all those pieces. So it's really laid out, makes so much sense. All right, Pamela, yes, I would love to turn it over to you and ask you the same question about contracts. And if you could highlight a few elements that small business owners should prioritize to protect their business.
Yeah, of course. Kristen, you called it. I'm going to start with intellectual property protections. I see it day in and day out with clients. When we are drafting these agreements, reviewing them, we really want to make sure, one, that everyone understands, both parties understand, are there any IP, intellectual property elements that are part of the business relationship? Is someone creating something? If they are, is there an accurate, transfer of those rights from one party to another? It happens all the time. A good example is a photography services agreement. You hire a photographer to take images for you, for your business. Copyright law says that the minute that they take that picture, they are the copyright owner, unless there is this transfer or assignment of rights. And usually the way that that's done is via a document, some kind of signed contract. So absent that, the photographer may be the owner of your images that you're using on your website. So you really want to make sure that you understand the ownership structure as well as any licenses, meaning, what rights are you giving someone else to use content that you've created, or what rights are they giving you to use content that you've asked them to create for your business. Second, I think really, really important for contracts is the scope of work, and this is whether you have hired someone to provide a service for you, or you are the one providing the service, making sure that your scope of work is crystal clear, clearly defined. Everyone's rights and obligations, expectations are written, hopefully in plain English. You want to ensure that everyone is on the same page as far as those expectations, so there aren't any issues in the future. Like Kristen said, contracts are kind of a set it and forget it kind of thing. You don't go back to them unless something has gone wrong. So you want to make sure that when it does go wrong, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, there are clearly laid out terms that dictate what happens in the event that someone doesn't pay. You want to terminate the agreement. But as far as the scope, if work needs to be done outside of that scope, you want to have language in place that addresses that. Will there be additional fees? Is there an adjustment of, original timelines? There is such a thing as called as scope creep. Clients may say that they want one thing in the beginning and then they keep adding things throughout the life of the business relationship. You want to make sure that you're properly compensated for that. If you are the service provider. So just overall clarity of the agreement, I would say, and make sure that you negotiate and talk through all of these points that Kristen and I mentioned, prior to signing, and make sure that, again, everyone is on the same page when you put pen to paper to sign these agreements.
Oh, so many good pieces in there. And thank you everyone attending for dropping your questions in the chat. We're saving them for the end, but I love that you just mentioned about the photography and, having that being the ownership of the photographer and making sure that that's clarified as well. There's just so many pieces to it. So these are all, I'm sure, really, really helpful in order to figure out what people should prioritize. Okay, so moving forward, Kristen, in your experience, what legal precautions have been crucial for small businesses to safeguard against unexpected challenges? And can you share some instances where these precautions made a significant difference?
Absolutely. So, given the types of clients that I work with who sometimes are starting as sole proprietors, at some point there's some sort of growth point and they move into an LLC or a corporation. I like to start with contracts because that is the most practical thing that you can do to kind of set the rules for how that relationship is going to work. You're setting expectations and boundaries. You're planning for what goes wrong, or what could go wrong, but also what happens if this goes right, which, as Pamela mentioned, one way we can kind of frame that in sort of a negative way when it's not spoken to is scope creep. But if the contract anticipates that the relationship may go well and your client's going to want more from you, you can absolutely have that compensation kind of built into that contract at the outset so that you don't necessarily have to start all over with like a new scope of work and negotiation around that scope creep per se. It could just be kind of fluid and allow that relationship to grow. So I like to think of like the contracts, if we make like an analogy here of like three crucial legal precautions. So you've got contracts, I'd say insurance, and then that business entity. The contract's kind of like the floor plan. The business entity is like the walls, kind of, protecting the house and also keeping your personal stuff kind of separate from business. And then insurance, I think of as like the roof. So that's, something goes wrong, that protects your cash flow within your business. So it's kind of keeping that stormy weather out from kind of ruin the entire plan that you have going for you. I'd say that a couple examples where, having these precautions in place made a really big difference. So one of my clients, when we had started, just given the nature of her business, it didn't really quite make sense for her to start forming an LLC, but she was super risk averse and wanted to. So we went ahead with that. And down the road, as her business grew, her marriage also fell apart and she ended up going through a divorce. And one of the things that she did have security and safety in was knowing that her business had been set up properly as an LLC. She had had an operating agreement in place signed by her spouse, acknowledging, non-ownership in the business. She did pay back the initial kind of startup costs that were a contribution to the LLC. And so she could go through this, very kind of devastating personal experience while also feeling safe and secure and continuing to run and grow her business. And like that wasn't going to be taken away from her or held against her. So that was a big piece that I've seen quite a few clients go through, especially in the past 3 years since the beginning of the pandemic. Another example, I'm also going to give a pandemic one. So this goes back to making sure that your contract is anticipating all the different things that might go wrong. And in early pandemic days, one of my clients is a big event organizer and was supposed to be holding a 12,000 attendee conference. And that wasn't possible because of the government starting to issue recommendations about shutting down and people getting stuck in quarantine. And just given the risk, even though it wasn't the full on lockdown yet, we were in this like little limbo zone. But because of what a lot of folks now know is called a force majeure clause or act of God, or basically like all these things we don't really anticipate, but like they could happen, like a pandemic. It did specifically list pandemic in there. And because of that, we were able to rely on some of that language to get refunds from the venues, which we were then able to pass through to refund a lot of the attendees who had been planning on going. So it protected not just my client's business, but also, the people that they were trying to bring this, massive, exciting event to, so that those relationships were protected. And then also in the meantime, we developed a little workaround for once things reopened that we were going to kind of book the next event there. So we tried to stay in right relationship with the venue too.
Wow, that's such a great example of how that protection had so many layers, not only for the business owner, but for the relationships they were cultivating with the venue and the attendees. So thank you so much for sharing that, Kristen. And then Pamela, I would love to kick this question to you as well, and just find out, what legal precautions have been crucial for small businesses to safeguard against unexpected, and can you share an instance or example where this precaution made a difference?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo a little bit about Kristen said, just because I think it's so important with the force majeure clause. So it's so nice you're gonna hear it twice. During the pandemic, a lot of my work in the beginning, contracts, agreements, negotiations, it's most of my background was, working with clients to see how they could not get out of obligations, but be able to pivot in a way that wouldn't hurt business relationships because they were being so affected by the pandemic. So, force majeure literally means greater force, so something that is preventing you from fulfilling those obligations. And while it is difficult to account for every single thing that will go wrong in an agreement, it just shows the importance of having really clear, fair, strong contract language in your having contracts in general, but then making sure that the language, makes sense. The importance of good business relationships. Ever since then, I'm sure other attorneys as well, we've pivoted and made sure that there is pandemic related language in our force majeure clauses. So, you kind of have to move with the times. That pandemic piece, I'm sure, wasn't included in many force majeure clauses. And now, we make sure to include them because you just never know what's going to happen. But along with having strong contracts, just to make sure that, you're safeguarded is not exactly legal, more a compliance thing, but having strong internal policies and procedures. You want to establish what your company's culture, what you want it to be like, so that everyone, your employees, contractors, they can abide by that and make sure that everyone is aligned. And I think that it really lends itself to smoother business operations, so that when there are challenges that come up, you know exactly what to do because you have those internal policies and procedures. And that can, range to so many things. But you just want to make sure to start thinking about that and have written policies and procedures as you're growing your business, so that you do have that company culture, company brand. And then lastly, of course, strong IP protections, intellectual property, whether that's trademarks or copyrights. And it's to ensure that your business's intellectual property is protected in case there are these unexpected challenges. But you also want to ensure that your business is not inadvertently infringing on someone else's IP by instilling those best practices on how to use content, for example, or what to do when your business is creating content. And content can be social media content, of course, but it's also the information on your website, any materials that you're giving to clients, vendors that you're hiring, like the photographer example that I had used. So again, ensuring that you are not the infringer, by incorporating those best practices, and also ensuring that your business's intellectual property is protected in the event that you find that someone is infringing on your stuff.
Yes, so many good pieces in there and so many things to consider. But I think, like you said, that piece was so nice. You hear it twice, especially in this post where we've done, so much pandemic things have happened, it's good to know what is a key element in that. Okay, so our next question. What are a couple of practical, proactive steps that small business owners can take to minimize potential legal disputes or incidents? Kristen, I'd love to start with you.
Thank you. So I think a lot of these same skills that really serve us well in our personal relationships also serve us well in business. Um, so I want to start with, again, kind of coming back to contracts, because that's really like the legal document that is kind of setting the tone for what the relationship is going to be. That's where kind of all the words are. So as Pamela mentioned before, when we look back at this contract, if we need to, we hope that there's language in there that anticipated something, or that kind of set, maybe some communication policies with clients that we're working with one-on-one. For example, maybe you don't want them texting you at all hours, so that we can make sure there's consistency between the words in the contract and the actions you are actually taking in your business. So that's where I think a little bit of thought up front, and maybe some hard conversations with potential clients or customers, or that kind of learning you do in the early stages of business, can go a long way when those words actually make it into the contract, or when you make changes in your business. You want to make sure that you are also updating the contract to reflect that, because that's really, it's not just the tool that you use, when a dispute comes up, but you're hoping to use it as a proactive way to set clear expectations up front, as well as, again, some boundaries around policies and other things like that. So I know people often don't, especially early days in business, small business owners want to make everybody happy. We love what we do. We love making people feel good. Sometimes the policies we start with don't work so well after, a month or 6 or 12 or 18 months into business, as our plates get busier and things actually start going well, or we notice a few things that aren't going so well. And then you can always come back to that contract and update that so that it is actually working better for you and protecting your time, your cash flow, and also just your energy. So that these aren't the things kind of keeping you up worrying at night. And I know that when we set clear expectations up front with clients, and we're consistent in following through with those and reminding them, that tends to lead to a better outcome. It helps us stay in right relationship, to the point that if there is some sort of misunderstanding that comes up, it ends up kind of being pretty easy to talk through, or again, to look back at that contract and be like, oh, well, this is where it said, like, that, so this is what I can provide to you. If you want more, this other fee is going to apply. And then finally, I feel like a big piece, because sometimes these contracts are also so heavy and so full of words and stuff, and people's brains just kind of tune out even when things feel really important. Like by the end of it, people aren't necessarily reading it very well. I think that communication is really important. So that can be, at the outset of the relationship, that can be at the point where you're signing the contract, it can be after the contract and during fulfillment of the relationship, just reminding folks of kind of what the rules are. And I know that this comes up for a lot of the kind of DEI organizations that I work with, who are hired by companies like Google or other big tech companies to kind of come in and revamp, everything. Certainly in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, everybody wanted to kind of plaster a Black woman's face on a billboard and say, hey, we hired her and we're doing this work. We want to make sure that she feels safe in her business, and that if they hire her just for this short little term, that doesn't mean they can kind of do that forever. Doesn't mean that they own everything that she has created and can sell that or distribute it throughout their entire company when they initially just hired her for 1 3-hour workshop, with a 15-person team. And so that's where, even on the slides of a deck that you might be presenting, you can have a little reminder like, this is for distribution and this team only. no copying. If you'd like, to distribute it elsewhere, like here's how we can work with you. People will do that on their websites, on social media as well. If you're sharing some free information and you are afraid of copycats, just let folks know, like how would you be open to, if somebody did want to bring you in or copy your information or distribute it more widely, like is there a way that they can work with you? Because a lot of times there's kind of misunderstandings around how this stuff works. Even when folks are like, this was just really great and I just really wanted to share it because it's really important. It's like, that's great. Also, pay her.
That is so important, so many important pieces. One, how you said your policies and procedures, being able to look back at those and make sure they're growing and changing as you're finding what doesn't work. And then also the piece of just, helping people understand where they're okay or when you're okay with them reaching out to you or how they can reshare your information is so key. And just giving people those guidance pieces up front is amazing. Okay, and Pamela, I'd love to take it to you. So what are a couple of your practical and proactive steps that you feel like business owners can take to minimize their potential legal disputes or incidents?
Yeah, I always like to recommend doing legal audits of your business. And, of course, this is something that you can do with the help of an attorney, but I really think that, it's stuff that you can do on your own as well to an extent, quarterly, monthly, whatever makes sense for your business. But it's kind of a touch base with your business internally, having a sit down with yourself and your team to see where you can make improvements. I always talk about the three legal pillars or legal foundations of a business. It's your entity logistics, which we've talked about, kind of the financial piece, contractual piece, which we've also talked about, and then of course, intellectual property. So, once you understand what these are, again, with the help of an attorney, you can from time to time take stock on where you are related to these foundations. It's essentially risk management that you can do yourself. You are assessing the risk in your business, and then coming up with a plan to address that so that you can avoid those risk disputes, in the future, these incidents. So if we're talking about your entity, financial logistics, okay, we don't have an accountant right now, or we haven't set up our LLC, make that a plan moving forward. This is what we need to do within a couple of months or the next quarter. Again, contracts. Oh, we are working with independent contractors and we don't have an agreement for them. Can we afford to have one now, like have one drafted by an attorney or from a template shop? No, but that's going to be a plan for next quarter. So it's okay, to not have all of these the pillars that I talked about figured out all at once, but I think it is important to assess where your business is in relation to these protections, and then always create a plan and goals so that you can eventually attain them. And then I think just again, proactive steps would be the pillars that I talked about. Contracts, they're kind of like insurance, making sure that you have that clear contract language, which we've talked about. But overall, performing and planning and scheduling these legal audits for your business internally with yourself, with your team, and then externally with people that you hire.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Pamela. And I really appreciate how you said that, it's okay. You can start where you are and just have some clear goals and a clear plan to move forward. So key. Okay, so we have our final question here. I just want to do a call out to everyone, who's attending. I see so many great questions in the chat. And we're definitely going to have some time for those, but if there is a question that's coming up for you, please definitely drop it in the chat. Okay, so let's get into our last question here before the Q&A. Kristen, with the insights you've shared, what's one immediate tangible action that our small business owner audience can consider today to enhance their legal protection and long-term security of their business?
This is a great question and also like a really hard one for me to answer because I don't really generally believe in like one size fits all advice for small businesses. So I think that, when we're talking about being in business, we're talking about, making some sort of impact on the world and also on our own bank accounts, right? So we do want to make sure that we are getting paid at the end of the day. So I think I would come back to protecting your cash flow, which you can do by taking a look at what your contracts are. That may be, a client services agreement. That may be, the terms of service or, payment terms if you have some sort of, website or e-commerce store. If you've got a brick and mortar, that's, your return or refund policy, making sure that that's clearly posted. So I would just say, look at whatever that source of income of primary revenue is for your business and make sure that, there's some policies around it so that it's clear when people are spending money on products you make or services you provide, when you're going to be getting paid. And then also what happens if they aren't happy or if they aren't, don't end up coming through and paying you if it's some sort of payment over time. I will also give a shameless plug because I encourage people to do this for their own businesses. That I have a lot of free tips and tricks on my Instagram at Hurwitz Law. So that's another just free resource if you want to kind of go down the rabbit hole of exploring other actions that you might take, which could be anything from making sure you've got a privacy policy on your website to business entity questions. I know I've seen some S Corp versus LLC questions in the comments. So yeah, there are a lot of resources available online, and I've tried to kind of cover the basics on my Instagram there.
Thank you for sharing that. I went ahead and dropped that in the chat where you can find Kristen on Instagram. And yes, there are so many free resources. So definitely take the opportunity to follow folks and people that are sharing those and people you respect in the industry. So Pamela, same question for you. I would love to hear about a tangible action step that our small business owners can consider today just to enhance that protection on their business and make it more secure in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's really important to find your team of experts. I know some people were asking in the comments, I don't mean to plug attorneys or anything like that, but I do think it's crucial, obviously, to work with these subject matter experts in order to really, help you feel confident in your business dealings. And it really will help you propel your business. And I'm talking about lawyers, accountants, I know that it is not always accessible or attainable, but there's, I think, a new generation of lawyers that are really throwing away the traditional model of having someone on retainer and, paying $1 million, attorneys that are working flat fees where there's upfront pricing in the beginning, just overall accessible services. And even if you don't hire someone for a full-fledged service or full time, you can set up one paid legal consultation where they are able to give you legal advice and can talk you through, some of the issues that you're having, identify some of the legal holes and how to fill them. Legal protections, for the most part, are not something that you typically can or should DIY outside of, like Kristen, I believe, has a contract template shop that's drafted by an attorney. That's a DIY resource, highly recommended, not something that you get off of Google, not so much. So just assembling your team, your squad, if you will, I call them, of trusted advisors that you can go to in the event that you have an issue with your business, especially in the beginning as you're setting everything up, because you want to make sure that you set it up correctly. The same goes with accountants. There are accountants that you can meet with quarterly and have that one-time, paid consultation just to have a touch base with your business. Eventually, as you grow and scale, you can hire people a little bit more, full-time or a little bit more regularly. And speaking of, starting your business, it's really important, like I said, to seek the advice of these experts, these team members early. It's almost always better than waiting until some particular tax issue or a legal issue has gotten out of control. It's good to address those things early on. So yeah, overall, just finding your team. Again, it's not something that you have to have all figured out tomorrow, but a plan, do your research, interview. Really, I always tell my clients, interview other attorneys, right? Like, ensure that the person that you are working with, that you will have a good working relationship with them, that you like them, that really important, that you like working with them, that they have experience in your particular industry, perhaps. So just taking those steps, and doing your research on all of the available options.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you mentioned finding your squad, and also that there are lots of different kinds of opportunities to work with the folks that you need or to incorporate in your squad out there. So we will be sending out a email. It won't only include this recording, but also resources. I'll also be dropping a couple of resources in the chat. And you'll see some resources here for you as well. But we definitely want to make sure that you feel like that you as a business owner feel empowered to move forward, and that you know where you can go next. So please keep an eye out for that email. And I would love to jump into some of these questions, because there have been so many wonderful questions in the chat. I've been keeping note of them. So as we go into these questions, everyone, just a quick reminder, while we do have these expert panelists and attorneys on the line, just remember this doesn't constitute legal business advice. But yes, let's go ahead and jump into this first question. So this one, Kristen, I'd love to kick this one to you. Because there's been a lot of questions about where can I get common language for contracts or whatnot. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about where to find those DIY resources, like the ones you offer, and what things you can look for.
Yeah, so I started my DIY contract template shop, I think it was about 5 years ago, because I kept getting questions like this. And I was like, I don't want to have folks pay me to vet, something they yanked off of Google or got from a friend or another business or their old employer in some cases. Also, by the way, you're not supposed to lift that from a previous employer. But that's why I started my contract template shop, because I've worked in contracts for a pretty long time now and wanted to be able to make a recommendation that didn't also come at an additional cost for me to kind of review that. I'm sure that Pamela could say the same thing, but a lot of times when folks come to me with a contract they kind of cobbled together or got for free elsewhere, it takes a lot longer for me to kind of sort through it and update it than it would when I'm kind of working from my own trusted language that I've developed over the course of time. So that's kind of the story behind my contract template shop. I know that there are a ton of other resources out there if you kind of want to wade through trying to go to Google School of Law. I don't generally recommend that. If you are at the point where you have some budget, I usually would say, if you're going to put that, if you can't quite work with a lawyer or early stage in business, and it doesn't quite make sense to invest in a fully custom contract, there are other lawyers, whether it's me or someone else, who do offer contract template shops where, again, it's kind of trying to bridge that gap between, getting something from a friend or the internet that isn't so trustworthy versus from an actual licensed lawyer who continues to work in the field. Because I've also seen lawyers kind of move away from actually continuing to work as a lawyer and just offer their contract template shops. And one of the issues there, as Pamela mentioned before with the force majeure clauses, is that that means they're not kind of necessarily staying up to date with what's going on in the different industries that those contracts might be serving. So I think that's where, finding a trusted licensed lawyer who is familiar with, your type of business, if they also offer a contract template shop, that's a good place to start. Also, we've got to kind of start where we can. So if you get a free contract from your friend and can pay for, even 30 minutes or an hour of a lawyer's time to look through it for some just major red flags, like if that's what you can do, then that's what you can do. So work with what we've got.
Yes, I love that sentiment, working with what you got, starting where you are. And also, excellent point about working with folks who are still in the field, because we have seen things are moving very fast these days. So, things change on a dime, and it's good to have those resources from folks who are working in it. And Pamela, you also have contract templates. So I wanted to kick it to you as well, if you had any thoughts on contract templates and the best place to find them.
Yeah, I think exactly what Kristen said, there are options out there. And I think that, traditionally in the legal field, whenever I have clients say this to me all the time, whenever you think about working with an attorney or getting legal protections, you're like, this is going to cost me $1 million. And, maybe at one point, yeah. But, in recent years, like I said, there's just so many more options. There are attorneys like Kristen and myself that are really trying to bridge the gap, because some is better than none, right? So she used the perfect example. If you do have to get, something from YouTube University or Google Law, maybe what you can afford is just having that one paid consultation with an attorney to help you pick out the red flags. I do that, for example, with influencer clients. They are building a following. They don't always have the funds to hire someone to redline their entire agreement with a brand. So we get on a call and I can pick out the big red flags, like they want to own your content, that, things like that. So I really think that doing your research into all of these available resources from in the legal space would really benefit you, because there are a lot of things out there, and ensure that these contract template shops that you find, because there are so many, are led by an attorney. You want someone who is an attorney, licensed in your state for particular things, that is going to give you that custom, tailored advice to your specific business situation, and not just a general, document preparation company that is not really going to help you and is just, pushing paper along. So I'd say do your research and ensure that you are getting this advice, these resources from attorney-led resources.
Excellent point. Okay, there is a question here. Pamela, this one is for you. So what are some common intellectual property violations that you see that small business owners are completely unaware of?
I would say two things. One is not securing the rights for their business name, and that has to do with trademarks. So trademarks are about your brand identity. If we think about McDonald's, you're already thinking of the golden arches, that's a trademarked logo. So it's about your branding, what your image to the public is. And so a lot of business owners launch without ensuring that that name that they're putting on products or on their website is clear to use. And one of the ways that you do that, you can do your own one Google search just to see what is out there that exists with your same name, offering your same goods or services. You can also go on the USPTO, which is the United States Patent and Trademark Office website, their database, and do a quick search to see if you find any other hits, we call them, of companies who have trademarked their name or applied for a trademark that are similar to yours or the same. And then, taking it a step further, you can work with a trademark attorney to do what we call is a comprehensive search. And that is where we scour databases, domain name databases, just to really get an accurate picture of what's out there. So just overall ensuring that this name that you've chosen, that you are going to invest time and money in, is one that you can use. I've had clients that have been in business for 5+ years, did not seek to, search their name. And then when they come to me to trademark, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place because I've found another company that has the same or similar name offering, the same or similar services. And at that point, there are some strategy moves that we can do, but not many, especially if the names are very similar. So I would say not securing the rights to your business name, your public facing name is one. And then of course, like I mentioned, not having best practices internally for the things that you are using that may be owned by others. So inadvertently infringing on other people's intellectual property. And again, on your website, on your social media content, if you're sharing an image, just ensuring that you have the rights to use that image. If you're hiring someone to create a logo for your business, ensuring that one, the elements that they're using, they're able to use, and that the ownership of that logo, that piece of content, that intellectual property is properly transferred to your business, because you do want to own those elements.
Excellent points. And just a quick follow-up. Did you say someone asked, what is the website again to search for the trademark?
I'll add it in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, wonderful. And Kristen, I have this question that I'll direct to you. When making policies and procedures for your business, should you have them looked at by a lawyer, and can most lawyers do that?
So I'm gonna go backwards. Can most lawyers do that? No. It's just like doctors, we've got some folks who are specialized in certain areas, or just have the experience and knowledge in that area. So you want to make sure that whatever type of business you have, whatever type of policy you're looking to put together, if you are going to work with a lawyer on that, either at the outset or at some point once you have the cash flow to support that investment, definitely work with a lawyer who understands your business. One of the common complaints I've heard over the years from a lot of the small business clients I work with is that a lot of law firms are not really set up to serve small businesses, in terms of kind of how their fee structure is, but also in terms of like their practical knowledge. When you've got a lawyer who has grown up in a law firm and stayed in a law firm and has never owned their own business or worked inside as like inside counsel at a business, they kind of skip a lot of the practical pieces where, like, you don't have unlimited cash flow. You like perfection is not achievable anyway, but kind of getting the fire hose of information as well as legal bills from a big firm is not particularly helpful. So again, just talk to a few different lawyers, make sure they understand your business and your way of kind of moving through the world is another big piece. Again, I work with a lot of Black, brown, and or queer owned businesses, and the way we've got to navigate the world and how safe and actually unsafe it is very different than when you've got, privileged white guy who's coming in with a lot of outside funding from a venture capital firm. So you want to make sure you're working with folks who understand you and hear you and see you on everything, but especially with, those internal policies and procedures, because once those are in place, you then have to follow them. So we want to make sure they actually work for you and with, the way that you want to kind of walk through your internal business world, as well as how your business interacts with external parties. In terms of actually kind of setting the policies and procedures, there are a lot of different things you can have in place. So one typical thing at some point when folks are hiring employees, you want to have a handbook in place that has kind of the internal policies and procedures for employees, but also each state has very different requirements on what needs to be in that kind of document and when you are legally required to have something like that in place, if that's even a legal requirement in your state. So again, working with a lawyer who understands your business and is licensed in your state and can work with lawyers licensed in the other states where your employees may be located is going to be really important there. For things like social media policies or, return and refund policies, again, you're going to probably work with a very different lawyer versus the employment lawyer that would help you with your employee handbook or your independent contractor policies. So I think that just thinking about the different, I always kind of bring it back to relationship. So the relationships you have internally at your business, as well as how those kind of interact with the external people, whether it's clients or customers or vendors, you want to make sure that there's, those policies kind of flow through. So if you have a customer service oriented policy, we want to make sure that, those folks are getting trained properly on how they're going to interact with and enforce certain things externally with your clients, or if they have to work with a vendor. So I think thinking about, like I usually say, if you sit down and kind of do a little brain dump of like, who does my business interact with? Where do I take money from? Where do I send it to? Then at least you get a sense of like who we're working with, so that then you can start thinking about, okay, is that on social media? Is that a one-on-one in person? Is that over, Zoom and technology? And then you can start thinking about kind of what you really need to put in place as far as policies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you everyone for all of your questions in the chat. I know that we could go on for a whole extra hour just kind of covering all these bases, but please remember that all of this information is going to be shared along with this recording so that you will have everything you need. Thank you so much, Pamela and Kristen, for answering all of the questions and sharing just all of your wonderful expertise with everyone today. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you again, Kristen. Thank you, Pamela. And thank you to our partners at Fifth Third Bank for this webinar. We hope you all feel more prepared to run your business. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.